creepy neighbor broke in and we didn't even know it. Story time. So when I was a kid, I had a best friend named Brittany who lived right through the woods. We could walk to each other's house. And we stayed with each other a lot. We were family. Brittany had a next door neighbor who was a known schmegs offender, and he'd been charged multiple times with child SA and molestation, but somehow he always got out of it and was currently living in a neighborhood full of children. Now, all of our parents warned us to stay away from him and don't go to his house, and they warned him to stay away from us, but that didn't stop him. He would still approach us. If we were walking, he would pull up and try to get us to get in the car, and if we were outside playing, he would walk outside and try to lure us into coming over to his house. Now, we didn't go over there, but other kids did, and there was constantly drama going on between him and the parents. This night, I was staying with Brittany, and somehow we got our hands on some soda, so we were jacked up, extremely hyper, and could not go to sleep. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, we were in her bedroom singing, dancing, wrestling, stomping, just being your typical hyper 10-year-old kids. Well, it got super hot in her bedroom because they didn't have air conditioning or a fan, so we opened her bedroom window halfway to get some airflow. After all that dancing and stuff, we got really hungry, and her mom had a whole cabinet full of SpaghettiOs, so we went in the kitchen to get something to eat. So we come back into her bedroom, and Brittany looks at her window and says, "Did you hit the window screen?" And I'm like, "No, why?" She said, "Look at it, it's hanging out." And we looked at the window, the freaking window screen had been popped out. And we also noticed now her bedroom window is open all the way, not halfway, but we couldn't remember if we did it or not. So I said, well, maybe one of us bumped into it when we were dancing and wrestling. There's no telling how we were bouncing off the walls. So we keep singing, dancing, and playing cards until we finally wear ourselves out and go in the living room to go to sleep. We lay down on the living room floor underneath the small blanket that her great-grandma had handmade when she was a baby. So a couple hours later, at like 6 a.m., we wake up to gunfire. Boom! Boom! I mean, it shook the whole trailer. Hell, I thought we was being bombed, so I jumped up and took off running and yelled at Brittany to come on, but she didn't get up. So I peek around the corner down the hallway, and I see her mom firing an AR out the back door. She was yelling at someone like, "Who do you think you are coming into my MF house? I'll blank you," going off. Well, then her husband comes in the front door holding a Ruger, and he said, "I'm going over there." She said, "No, wait for the police," but he went anyways. And me and Brittany are like, "What is going on? What happened?" Because when we knocked out, we were gone. We slept hard. Then her mom sits down and starts questioning us like, "Did y'all let this neighbor in the house?" And we say no. She said, "Did you let him in the front or back door?" We said no. "Did you open the window for him?" We said no. She said, "Are y'all telling the truth?" We said, "Yes, we swear." She said, "Well, I'm going to tell y'all something that's going to scare you, but I don't want you to freak out." She said 10 minutes prior, she woke up and came in the kitchen to get something to drink. And she looked in the living room and saw me and Brittany asleep on the floor. And when she started to walk back to her bedroom, something told her to look back at us. And when she did, she saw a man's tennis shoes hanging out from underneath the blanket we were sleeping under. So she looks closer and she can see there's a grown man laying beside of Brittany. It was me, Brittany, and then this man underneath the blanket. So she walked over and snatched the blanket off his face where she recognized the neighbor. So she starts yelling out for her husband and runs to get her weapon. But by the time she got back with her weapon, he had ran out the back door and was gone. So he unlocks and opens the back door, and when he runs out, she runs behind him, firing her weapon. So her mom stayed with us, and her husband went over to the neighbor's house to confront him, but he wouldn't open the door. She said, "Don't panic, the law is on the way, everything's going to be fine." The law came out and told her parents because there was no way to prove he broke in or did anything, they couldn't arrest him, and her parents were furious. We did show them where the window screen was popped out, but they said there was no way to prove who did it. We figured out he broke in while we were in the kitchen, and he hid underneath the bed and stayed there while we sang, danced, and played cards, and didn't come out until we went in the living room and fell asleep. That's terrifying enough, but what Brittany told me after the police left really freaking scared me. Trigger warning, this part is graphic. She said she didn't come out from under the blanket as fast as I did because her underwear and shorts had been removed completely off her body, and he did that. But she didn't tell the police because she didn't think they would believe her because they didn't believe us about him popping the window screen out or her mom seeing him in the living room, so she didn't think they'd do anything. But they had to live next door to this man for quite a few years after this happened. And even after her mom fired at him, he would still talk to us and try to get us and other neighborhood kids to get in his car or go to his house. But karma is a witch. This man died one of the worst deaths possible. He suffered. He got trapped underneath his car when the jack fell and it slowly squished him. And get this, some of the kids that were outside and heard him yelling for help were his prior victims. They went over there, saw him dying, and left him there. Allegedly, a teenage boy walked up to him and the man said, "Go get help." And the boy said, "No, I'm a liar. Remember, nobody's going to believe me." And he walked off.
Hey y'all, back with another story time. And this story time happened when I was probably like 16 or 15. It was one of those. But it was me, it was my older cousin, it was my mom and my dad, and I think like 2 of their friends. And my older cousin, she was like one of those older cousins that was like a cool older cousin. So she was only like probably like 19, 20 at the time. And we went to go play manhunt, but at this park called the Crossings. It was like over the summertime, so I didn't have a curfew really as long as I was with my parents. And we decided we're going to play manhunt in the dark. It's going to be girls against boys. Me and my older cousin and my mom, we go in our area or whatever, and the boys is supposed to be searching for us. But the park is so freaking big. It's like a fake Central Park, if you want to say that. So we're using our flashlights on our phone because that's how dark it is. And it's a lot of woods in the area. It's a lot of cows in the area, but like the cows are like guarded. So like we can't get to them and they can't get to us unless we hop the gates. So we hearing noises and stuff, but we're just thinking that it's the cows because we're around animals. So we're just running around and shit, but we keep hearing shit, but we know that we're not around the boys. We know we're not around my dad and his friends. We keep like getting quiet and turning off our lights to see if we hear something. I wasn't really scared because I was with like older people, but I noticed that like the two older ones was scared, which was my mom and my older cousin. It sounded like whatever it was following us though, because like there's tall grass at this park. So, like, somebody could be hiding in it and following us. There's, like, a lot of woods, like I said, so somebody could have been hiding in the trees. But, like, whatever it was didn't have a flashlight of its own, so it might have been an animal. I personally think it was a skinwalker, and I'm going to get to why. So, we're literally, like, we're going far, like, deep into the park. We're taking turns that we didn't turn before. Like, we're going far. And eventually we do start hearing the boys yelling out for us. And they like trying to get us to come back. Like, they don't want to play no more. But we just like holding on to our game. Like, no, we're not coming out. You got to find us. That's when whatever it was started making like noises that sounded like grunting noises. Like, I can't really mimic them, but the noises sounded so weird. Like, it sounded like a skinwalker. Like, y'all could look up what a skinwalker noise might sound like, and you could get like kind of a picture of it. It might not be exactly the same, but you could get a picture of it. We keep hearing those noises, and every time I pulled my phone out to record so I could like later on look back on it, when I looked at all the videos that I was recording to hear the noise, you could not hear the noises. Yeah, you could not hear the noises in none of the videos that I took. So I'm like, what the fuck? Because at the time of us still playing Manhunt, I'm trying to listen on the phone, but I can't really hear. So, we keep playing. We like, all right, we gonna just call it off because it literally sounds like somebody is creeping up behind us, looking at us in the trees. And mind you, of course, it could have been the wind. It could have been the wind blowing, but like we're looking in the tall grass and there's this one specific area that looked like it keep moving. Like I said, it could have been the wind, but to me it looked like something could have been like crouched up in there, and it didn't look like a specific person. It didn't look like an animal, but like you couldn't really tell because it was dark and the flashlights on our phone don't go that far. So we eventually tell them like, all right, we done playing because now it's to the point where we're all getting a bad feeling. Like, even the boys are getting a bad feeling. So we're like, all right, we're gonna just leave. I'm looking at the videos on my phone. You can't hear none of the sounds. Like I said before, you can't hear none of the sounds that we was hearing. Like, when I tell you saw like a person grunting and like they was in pain and like they wanted to yell for help but they couldn't yell for help, so they was just moaning and groaning, it was not on video. But yeah, that was my little encounter with a skinwalker or whatever you want to call it. But if you guys want more story times, comment down below.
Get comfy and get cozy. Spooky story time. In the 1930s, in the state of Ohio, there was a doctor named Dr. Crow who took some orphans under his wing to care for them, or so people thought. In reality, he was performing inhumane experiments on these children. He would inject substance into the children's head, which caused their head to expand, giving them the name melonheads. When I thought about this, it gave me the chills because it made me think about the other children with the, that colored eyes. Anyways, so it is said that this doctor would perform these experiments, and so the children were malnourished, and they had these tiny bodies and these very sharp teeth. Well, I guess the kids got fed up. They ended up unaliving Dr. Crow, and well, with nobody to care for them, they were left to roam the forests of Ohio, and I guess that there has even been sightings in Michigan. Imagine driving down a dark road and seeing these children come out of nowhere with their sharp teeth And they're feral. They haven't been around anybody to care for them. Oh, I can't even imagine thinking about that. I mean, what could they possibly be eating? I'm sure they're starving, and if they come across you, you're gonna look like a tasty snack. If you're from Ohio or Michigan and have heard about these melon heads, I would love to know in the comments below. And if you love listening to these kind of stories, don't forget to hit that follow. And thank you to everyone who always shows so much love and support.
Before I get into this story, this one is trigger warning to the max. I was debating on even telling it because it's so gory, so I'm going to have to leave out a lot of details, but this one is horrendous, and it has to do with a child. This is number 15 of Rob's creepy search and rescue stories. He said this one was told to him by one of the firefighters helping on one of the ops. So this firefighter, we're going to call him Jake, tells the story of one of the calls he was on trying to rescue a kid from a massive tree. He wasn't given any details prior, just that he needed to come and help because they did not have the proper equipment. Apparently, they called him out because this tree was so huge that the search and rescue officers didn't want to risk trying to climb it themselves, and they have training in that area. So Jake was let out about 2 miles, and then they got to one of the biggest trees in the area, and they pointed up. So at first, Jake kind of laughs as he's looking up because there's just no way that any child should have been able to get up that tree. He even made a joke about the old cat being saved from up the tree, but nobody laughed. Nobody thought he was funny. And with that, the captain just shook his head and said, get up there and get him down. And that's when Jake knew something definitely was up, but he didn't pry and he just went on with it. Jake said that as he climbed the tree, he kept on wondering if they were playing some kind of prank on him. Because seriously, there was just no way that anybody, especially a child, could have gotten up this massive tree. Jake said that while the tree was very massive at the base, as he got higher and higher, it started tapering off quite a bit. It got to the point where a couple of times he thought he might have to turn back for safety for his own life. He said that when he was almost at the top, he did see a flash of blue hanging from one of the branches. It was the kid's shirt that was caught on the branch. Jake called up to him and he did not reply. And as he kept moving forward, he realized that this poor child was gone. And this is how Jake describes it. And I'm going to try to tell you as much as I can without pushing a violation. Jake said that this kid was laying there on his side, cradled in the fork of a branch, or what's left of him. Jake said that the fact that he was even up there was sheer luck, because if he had fallen any other way, he'd have come crashing right down to the ground. But he said it wouldn't have mattered though, because this child was passed away long before he hit the tree. He literally said, I don't know who put him there or how or why, but this was effing sick. His insides were now outside and they were strewn all around the branches around him. Jake said that the contents appeared to have come from the top and the bottom. Jake says that his eyes were no longer there, and it was like he was a stress ball that was squeezed so hard and just sort of popped. So Jake is almost in shock now, and he describes some other gory things, but I just can't keep going into detail. It is absolutely horrific and tragic, and he couldn't even imagine sort of grabbing him and flinging him over his shoulder, so he just kind of nudged him with a stick and let him come down on his own. He said that he almost got fired for doing that, but there was no way he could literally collect all of the child to scoop him up and bring him down in any other manner. So Jake gets to the bottom of the tree and he is furious. He gets up in the captain's face. He's like, who do you think you are sending me up there knowing that that kid's already gone? But he just kind of said, that's none of your concern. Thanks for getting the evidence down. And Jake said he'll never forget the way he phrased that, calling him evidence. Like he's not even a person. Like this poor child didn't just have something unspeakable happen to him. So the captain had a crew member lead Jake out of the woods, but a couple other members stayed behind, and Jake thought that was really weird. Jake had so many questions, but they were very stern and said that they can't discuss an open case. So Jake just asks, well, what do you think happened to him? And the guy goes, I mean, I would have thought it was a crush injury, judging by the way everything came out of him. But usually those come along with deep contusions, like under the skin, and there were none. It's almost like this kid got stuck in a massive vacuum that just pulled everything from the inside out. Jake said, it bothered me so bad. It still bothers me so bad. And that's all the information he ever got. It was super freaking crazy and super shady. And my heart goes out to that poor child and his family. I think I'm going to stop there with this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'm pretty sure there are some other creepy search and rescue stories to share.
Any paranormal story that has to do with old people freaks me out so much. This story freaked me out. So Violet had been living with her grandmother since she was a child. Her mother was actually a medium. Now, they lived in this house, but nothing actually ever happened in this house until she turned 14 years old. So one night, Violet is in her room, and her grandmother comes in her room to set an alarm for her to wake up the next morning. Violet is standing behind her grandmother, and there's a window right next to her. Now, by this window, she sees something out of the corner of her eye. So she looks over outside of the window, and they live across like this Catholic church that's not very active but still has members. As she's looking outside, she sees this old woman, and she's just standing outside. She's wearing a poncho around her shoulders, and she's very short, and she is just staring at Violet, or at least staring at her house through the fields, because she's pretty far away. Now, Violet doesn't really think anything of it. It does kind of creep her out a little bit, but she just kind of brushes it off. But then the next night, the same thing happens. And then this starts to happen often. Her grandmother would be in her room setting her alarm for the next morning, and she would be standing behind her grandmother looking outside, and she would see this old woman staring at the house or at her. She didn't know. Now, she still doesn't take it seriously, right? Because she thinks it's just some woman standing outside. There's not really much she can do about it until this happens. So one night, she goes into her kitchen and she's getting water for her kitten. And she is getting the water, she's putting it in the bowl, when suddenly she sees something out of the corner of her eye. She looks over, and in her backyard, peeking through the window, is that old woman, just peeking through the window. So this actually scares Violet this time. So she goes running back into her room. Now, years pass of weird stuff like this happening, with her seeing this old woman everywhere. And this ties into the next part of the story. Now, fast forward to when Violet is 18 years old, and she's in her bedroom and she's watching TV, and she starts to get this heavy feeling like she's being watched. She starts to think that maybe it's what she's watching. It's making her feel uncomfortable. So she picks up her remote to change the channel. The remote won't work. Now, her door was closed, but she has a small window on top of her door where the light comes in from the kitchen. Now, at this time, her grandparents are in bed, her whole house is quiet, and she starts to hear this sound, and it sounds like rhythmic. And then she realizes that it's chanting. Now, in this moment, she could not move, she could not speak, she was frozen with terror. But for some reason, she kept trying to still change the channel. So she can't move though, so she can't change the channel. But she's just thinking about the fact that she needs to change the channel. And then she starts to hear this very eerie tribal-like music, and then chains just dragging against the floor. So now there's chanting, there's chains dragging across the floor, and she's sitting there absolutely petrified. She has no idea what's going on. And then it just starts to get louder and louder and closer until it is right outside of her door. And at this point, she is frozen, praying inside of her head when boom, 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 she hears 4 loud bangs on her door, and then her TV and her lights simultaneously just shut off. Her room is pitch black now. She is frozen, she cannot move, and she is taking her eyes and she's scanning the entire room. When suddenly she hears someone is breathing super heavy. So she slowly looks up at the window above her door, and that old woman is peeking through that tall window, fogging up the glass, breathing. So she just starts praying. She just starts praying and praying and praying and praying, and she's closing her eyes, and finally she opens them. She's able to move again all of a sudden. She stands up. She slowly looks up at the window, and that woman is gone. The chanting, gone. The chains, gone. Everything just stopped. Now, somehow she falls asleep. I have no idea how she does this. I have no idea how people do this in scary stories. Then the next morning, she wakes up, she runs downstairs to her grandma, and she tells her grandma what happened. And she's like, "What, did you hear this?" And her grandmother is like, "No, I didn't." So her great-grandmother then looks at her and is like, What happened?" So she tells her great-grandmother what happened. And her great-grandmother is like, "I actually heard that. I heard that chanting last night, but I didn't see anything. So I went back to sleep." And she, to this day, has no idea what that was, but it absolutely terrifies her to this day. So what do you guys think this was? So creepy. Oh my God. I want to know what happened afterwards. Like, did she ever see this thing afterwards, this old woman after that? Or was that the end of it? Also, was this like, obviously, this woman wasn't. I mean, if she was peeking inside of like that window, she was inside of her house. So obviously, this woman, in my opinion, was probably not alive. Just that's what I'm thinking. Obviously, unless someone broke into her house. But the chanting and the chains and the music, obviously, that is this all sounds paranormal to me. And there's something about old people and children ghosts that freak me out so bad, and I don't know if I would be able to handle that. I don't know if I would ever be able to go to sleep again. I would not have been able to go to sleep that night. So kudos to you, girl. I was actually literally just watching scary movies with my mom, and me and my mom were talking about how people just go to sleep after something scary happens, and we were both like, I don't understand how people do that. We literally were just talking about it like at half an hour ago. But she wants to know what you guys think this was. Like, what exactly do you think this was? What do you think the chanting was? What do you think the old woman like signifies? I have no idea. I can't think of anything. So if you guys have any ideas, your comments, suggestion, thoughts, please drop them below. But as always, please be respectful.
Weird spooky Christmas stories. They came across this on Reddit. They'd been at a friend's house on Christmas Eve. It was already 4 a.m. Christmas Day, and he and a friend were walking down the street on the way home. He said that the streetlights had just flickered on after having been off all night. He said it was quiet, too quiet. He said they were walking for maybe 2 minutes. They turned onto a dead-end road that slopes down a hill, and that there is only one way out of that street. And he noticed a group of people standing about 50 meters ahead. 5 people, 2 children, 2 adults, and 1 elderly woman. He said it seemed like a family with their parents and the grandma. He said they were all just standing under a streetlight at 4 in the morning Christmas Day. He said he thought it was strange, but nothing impossible. He said that as he and his friend began walking closer to them, something about the family became increasingly strange. They were all wearing the exact same color palette: white shirt, beige pants, beige dress. Their faces were unnerving because they were extremely pale, they looked sickly, they had sunken in eyes, and he said that they had dark circles under them as well. He said none of them spoke to him and none of them moved. They just sat there staring at them as they walked by like this. His friend, who was a woman, became visibly terrified. He said he pulled her closer, they picked up the pace, but he said that the feeling was only growing. Out of nowhere, a stone flew in front of them and hit the pavement. They both jumped, and his friend began to panic. He spun around, ready to confront them, and they were gone. He said that they just completely vanished. He said that they were standing there seconds before, and that on that dead-end road there was nowhere for them to go. He said to have gotten off that road, they would have had to slip past them. So now, fully terrified, they started running. He said the road takes about 10 minutes from end to end to get where he was going, and they are about 6 minutes into their walk. Every few steps, they looked behind them, expecting to see something. When they finally reached the end of the road, they turned back, and there was still nothing. And then the streetlights went out. He said for about 20 seconds, they just stood in total darkness, except for the faint light of a bus stop up ahead. And as their eyes adjusted, they saw them again. The same 5 figures: 2 children, 2 adults, 1 elderly woman, just standing silently at the bus stop, staring. But there was nowhere else to go. He said he tried calling a friend for help, but apparently their phone was dead. His friend started crying because she was so terrified. He said he was scared too, but he pushed it into anger. He said he started marching toward the group of people, ready to confront them. Then the streetlight suddenly snapped back on. He said he flinched, grabbed his friend, and as he started walking towards the bus stop, they were gone again. He said that he can still remember their faces perfectly. The hollow eyes, the matching clothes, the way they stared at them. He said this all happened Christmas morning at 4 a.m. He said neither him or his friend have been able to shake it. Whenever they tell people, their friends just say, "Oh, your mind was playing tricks on you because of the dark." He said that it didn't feel like a trick to him and that he still has nightmares about it. Almost every single night. He says that he just cannot explain how those people disappeared twice with no sound. This was such a good story. I've heard of people encountering things like this, and a lot of people are wondering if this is something demonic, if there's some type of like veil thinning and you're seeing something from like another dimension or from like the other side. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if any of you have ever heard or seen anything like this, send me your story.
I wanted to share a story my dad told me that really freaked me out. He's from a small town in Guatemala called San Jose La Herrada, and this happened when he was about 15 years old. He came from a poor family, so to help out with money, he decided to sell silverware. It started out as a normal day. He got his silverware ready and headed out the door. He went to different houses like he normally did, but then he got to one house that looked very old, almost like no one lived there. Despite that, he knocked on the door. To his surprise, someone answered. It was an old man. He was very well dressed. He wore a dark royal blue suit, fancy black shoes, and carried a dark red cane. My dad asked him if he wanted to buy some silverware, and the old man replied, I will buy your whole kit, but I don't have money right now. Could you come back tomorrow? My dad was thrilled and quickly said yes. The next day, he headed straight to the house. He knocked on the front door, but no one answered. He checked again the following day, and the day after that, for a whole week, but still no answer. One day, while he was knocking, a lady happened to walk by and asked why he had been knocking on the door for so long. My dad explained that the old man who lived there had promised to buy all his silverware. The lady looked at him with a serious expression and said, That house has been vacant for 15 years. Goosebumps ran down my dad's spine. He tried to make excuses, refusing to believe what the lady had just told him. But then he remembered something that didn't sit right. The old man was dressed in luxury that you wouldn't find in a small town where my dad lived. To this day, my dad still wonders who that old man really was. This story takes place in our current home. My family and I moved from an old historic house, which was sometimes creepy, to a newer home built in 2018 in the same town. My parents don't believe in the supernatural, but my sisters and I have always found it interesting. One night, my parents were out, and my two sisters and I were home alone. We had been watching cable TV and were about to head to bed when we suddenly heard keys in the back door. We thought our parents had come home, and we just hadn't heard their car. We heard the back door swing open and close, followed by the sounds of keys being sat down on the dining room table. I went to the dining room to say hi, but no one was there. My sisters and I checked the back door, and it was still locked, with the deadbolt secured. No one was home. Their car wasn't in the driveway, and our parents were still far away. I remember being so scared that all of us slept in my room that night. But it didn't stop there. As we were about to fall asleep, we heard it again. The sound of keys in the door swinging open, and keys being sat down. This time, we grabbed whatever we could find for self-defense and went to check. But again, no one was there. Not even a minute later, a vehicle pulled into the driveway. It was finally our parents. When I tell you we were spooked, we were terrified. Fast forward a few years later. I was homesick with the stomach flu. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, when I suddenly heard the back door open and the sound of keys being placed on the table. I thought my dad had come to check on me, but when I looked, his truck wasn't there, and he texted me saying he was still at work. Even now, my sisters and I sometimes get weird vibes in certain rooms. There are times when we feel too scared to even turn on the lights. One night, I was home alone around 10 p.m., heading to the kitchen to make popcorn, when I heard shuffling, and something dropped in my sister's room. I froze, but quickly, I rushed back to the couch. Even my cat became more alert than I had ever seen him. I was so scared I started crying, desperately wishing for everyone to come home. Now I just pray, keep crosses around the house, and try to bring as much positive energy as I can.
Let's read another scary Reddit story. Did I meet a skinwalker in New Mexico? A year or so ago, I left England for the summer in order to travel a bit and maybe find some work abroad for a few months. I managed to stumble across a decently paying job as a farmhand in the northwestern area of the Navajo Nation Reservation in New Mexico. The farmer was looking for somebody to help him with busy work over the summer and allowed me to sleep in what I can only describe as a cabin, basically a big shed he had renovated in order to house whoever he had working for him at that moment in time. It was a large farmland, and the shed was situated pretty much parallel to the house across the largest field of crops. Living in this shed with me was a half Native American boy who was about the same age as me, named Ahiga. Anyway, I arrived at the cabin after a long and stressful journey by plane, and then pretty much hitchhiked my way across the USA. I met the farmer and the boy, and they both seemed friendly enough. Everything was smooth sailing for around 2 weeks, even with the relentless heat beating down on my pale English skin. Ahiga and I became close as we were around each other 24/7. He would always tell me interesting stories of Navajo legend. He often told me of the Naldalushi, skinwalkers, in detail, and he seemed very knowledgeable on the subject. He told me how he dreamed of these creatures often. It seemed like he had some kind of morbid obsession with these things. I chalked it all up to horror stories and didn't really put any stock into what he was saying, although it did interest me. I've never been one to believe in or fear the supernatural. One evening, after a heavy day of work, I headed back to the cabin to shower and change. I got back to the cabin, showered, got changed, and sat down on my bed. There was no sign of Ahiga yet, which was weird because he would usually be back by now. I waved it off and left my cabin to head into the nearest town, just to explore a bit more of the land I was staying in. I explored for a while and found a nearby bar to drink in, as I hadn't had a single drink since moving here. I left the bar at around 10:30 p.m. and it was pretty much fully dark. I began to walk back to the farm. As I walked back along the windy road, I felt as if I was being watched. I walked on a bit faster and made my way across to the farm. As I walked around the farmer's house, I noticed what looked like someone carrying a bag under their arm leaving my cabin. Something felt and looked not right about this figure and its movements. I went stealth mode almost instinctively and took the long way around the field, hiding behind the fencing. I managed to get a good angle on the figure. As he stood up, the light shining from within the cabin illuminated, and I saw that it was Ahiga. At first, I was relieved, but then I saw how erratically he was moving, almost with no rhythm at all. Under his arm, he clutched a dog's severed head. I felt sick to my stomach and ducked down, but managed to compose myself. I poked my head up to check once more, and he was heading off into the forest. I took this opportunity to dart for the cabin and pull my keys out to unlock the door. As I got close, I tripped and dropped my keys and thundered to the ground. I propelled myself back up and turned to see why I fell, and saw I had tripped over the rest of the beheaded dog. I swung around to look towards the woods and saw Ahiga on all fours, not like an animal but like a person with their arms and legs bent in the wrong direction. It felt as if he was looking directly into my soul. He had 2 yellow glowing eyes and a confused look on his face. "I am Ahiga," I think he tried to say, but the words were guttural and frothy, almost like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I unlocked the door and bolted inside, locking it behind me and closing all the curtains and windows in the cabin. I sat awake all night hearing noises and feeling watched somehow. I'd hear whatever it was at the door now and again pretending to be Ahiga. It would repeat parts of the stories Ahiga had been telling me whenever we were relaxed in the cabin together on previous nights, and every time it showed up, a horrific smell filled the cabin and made me vomit a few times. In the end, the harassment stopped, and daylight began to shine through the curtains. I checked out the window and saw nothing outside. I quickly gathered all my possessions and got the fuck out of there. I flew back to England the next week after using all my farmhand money to rent a hotel room on the East Coast, as far away from that place as I could. I often wonder what happened to Ahiga, but I'm glad I didn't wait around to find out. Many of you won't believe this story, but I can assure you it's 100% true, and I still think about it at night to this day. I'm still not sure what I saw, but sometimes I still feel as if I'm being watched, but I think maybe it's just my paranoia. There's no stories of these things following you across the pond, is there?
It is time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. If you have a spooky story of your own that you think nobody else will believe and you'd like to share it, feel free to send me a DM. Make sure as well to add me on Facebook, same handle, Autumn in Appalachia. Without further ado. Now for my OGs, y'all know that we went down the rabbit hole about creepy hospital stories and stuff. And while this isn't a creepy hospital story, it is a creepy work story, but it's about a hotel, okay? This follower, we're going to be calling them M for the video. I will be tagging like a private account they have here on TikTok. They want to remain anonymous, and they are also not going to be revealing the name of the hotel that they worked at, because when they worked there, they had some contractual agreements with this company and are still a little nervous about getting in hot water if they were to like reveal the name of this hotel. Regardless, it is really weird. It's really creepy, so buckle up. M began this story by saying that she used to work night shift at a hotel, and it was during COVID, so she always worked by herself on her shift. They were understaffed as well, so she wore a few hats with her job. She did like reception, she also did laundry, things like that. So she said that the building itself was newly constructed, but it was sitting on a plot of land where previous hotels and other businesses had been before. And while the building was newly constructed, it had a very old energy, and she said that there was something about it that felt off, and it creeped her out from day one. M did a little bit of research not long after beginning work here, and she found out that on this plot of land, buildings, businesses, hotels, whatever that previously stood on that plot had a history of reoccurring fires. And when she looked up like articles and things about these fires, none of them were explained. Like there was seemingly no reason as to why these fires started, and these buildings were all stacked very tightly, like next to each other, and the buildings on either side of the hotel never would catch fire, right? Even though they should have. So, like I said, it's something she took note of and thought was a little bit strange. So one night she's working a shift. It's a night like any other, and she's in the reception area. She's doing paperwork, and she is on the phone with her grandma to try to pass the time and, you know, keep the vibes light. She would usually talk to her grandma on the phone. She wore like a headset around her neck. So her grandma heard everything that occurred this night. Now, as she's standing there doing her paperwork, around the corner, she hears this emergency stairwell door that only employees have access to open and close. And then it's followed by the sound of footsteps. Now, when she peeks around the corner, she is still audibly hearing these footsteps, but she does not see anybody that belongs to the sound of the footsteps. Nothing is there. She's like, okay, she tries to pass it off, and she said that she goes back to what she's doing, and then the footsteps abruptly stop. So she's like, okay, maybe like somebody is here, and they like came up and like went to the bathroom, and that's why like the footsteps stopped. She tries her best to go back to her work, but she, not long after, hears the footsteps again, followed by evil, heart-sinking, as she described it, laughter echo down this hallway. She immediately said that her heart drops, and she decides she is going to step into the office, close the door behind her, sit in there, like try to calm herself down and like build herself up, because her next task at work is to walk down that hallway, go into the basement, and do laundry. After a few minutes in the office, she builds up her courage. She steps out of the office doors and she runs as fast as she can down this hallway. And she said she gets to this area in the hallway where there are two meeting rooms on either side of the hallway. And both of these meeting rooms have like floor to ceiling glass windows. And it is like pitch black in this whole area of the hallway. There are no lights on. And as she is making her way down this pitch black hallway, she hears tapping on the glass on her right side, followed by the sound of footsteps just scuffling really quickly behind her. She darts to the employee door at the end of the hallway, locks it behind her, jumps on the elevator, descends down into the basement, which she said feels significantly less creepy than upstairs, and she spends the entire time doing what she has to do down there, dreading the fact that she has to go back upstairs. She eventually, though, finishes her laundry, still on the phone with her grandma, and she knows she has no choice. She gets back on the elevator and makes her ascent back up to the top floor. When she gets back upstairs, she again darts down this hallway and she hears these footsteps pounding behind her. She said they were matching her pace. Out of reflex, she turns around to see who's chasing her. There is nobody there, and there's no way she wouldn't have seen somebody chasing her. She said at this point she was so terrified, she runs back into the office and locks the door behind her. She decides at this point she's going to pull up the security cameras. Now, there is no camera pointing directly down this hallway, but to her horror, when she looks at this camera, she sees this black, like misty shadow figure standing right outside the office door that she is locked in. This thing has itself positioned between the office door and the reception area. Broom in hand, just to make herself feel better, she is sitting in there. She gets a wire rack of like supplies and pushes it in front of the door, and she starts hearing laughing, running, knocking, like all this chaotic, crazy noise. There is nothing on the camera that she can see, no person that is making this commotion, only this black mist like standing there looming in front of the door. And she said that suddenly all the lights go out. Now, as she's looking at the camera feed, she realizes that the office area and the reception area are the only lights in the building that are out, and it lit up these red emergency lights. She said that she wants to hit the panic button, but she's too scared to go hit the panic button because it is in the reception area under the front desk. The office phones also will not make outbound calls, and she's too scared to get off the phone with her grandmother. Within seconds of all this happening, the alarms for like fire, emergency evacuation, burglary, like all these alarm systems that they have start blaring, going off. And as she's looking at the camera feed, she's also seeing a notification for a silent fire alarm that is going off in a room that she knows is completely unoccupied. There are no guests staying in that room. She's continuing to look at this camera feed, and outside of this unoccupied room, she starts getting motion activated alerts from the camera system. Like there's movement around this room. She checks to see if a key card has been checked out by a guest. No key card has been checked out. That room has been unaccessed for days. At this point, she has to brave her fear, go out to the reception area and click a code on this like panel that will turn off all of these alarms, and also that she can use to call authorities. She gets out there, and in a frenzy, she's typing in the panel code to try to call 911 to turn the alarms off. It will not accept the code. She hits the panic button under the front desk. Nothing happens. It won't work. And she starts hearing this like laughing, growling sound beside of her. She turns, there is nothing there. She said that the sound was not just beside of her. It's like echoing down the hallway. It seemed to just like surround the entire area. She is so terrified out of her wits. She runs back into the office, locks the door again, starts to email her coworkers, hoping that they will like see it and come to her rescue. And while she is sitting there, something starts banging on the office door and is like laughing. She then looks at the security camera, and she said that she swears on everything she saw a demented looking face staring back at her in this camera feed. She was absolutely beside herself. She'd never experienced anything like this before. And while there had been like creepy things that happened in the hotel, nothing to this extent. At this point, Em is just terrified to tears. By some stroke of luck, though, her coworkers happened to see her email, and they came into work to her rescue. Now, as she's waiting for them to show up, she's still watching this camera feed, and she said that the reception area camera started glitching and alerting to movement. When she looked, she would see these like black masses and these orbs streaking across the screen. When the coworkers showed up, she said some of her coworkers, they believed because they had experiences themselves. Others, though, were in disbelief, and they're like, you were probably just scared because it's like night shift, or you're like making this up, like you've got to be like just screwing with us. She is adamant, though, that this is a real experience. This is something she really went through, and she was so rattled by this that she in fact quit that job within a week of that night. To this day, she doesn't know how to explain it, but that is one building she won't be returning to. Also, just a side note, but I am a believer that places like hotels, nursing homes, hospitals, are probably a little more apt to have some sort of a haunting than maybe just like your regular home. And it's because of the mass amount of like sad things or bad things that tend to happen in these places. Like, granted, for a short time, I even worked at a hotel. I worked as a maid, and there were like ODs, there are deaths, crime, things like that take place. And so would that not, potentially leave some sort of like a residual energy that is negative, right? Some sort of bad juju. I don't think it's that far-fetched to think that the hotel that M worked at had some sort of bad juju, whether it's like, oh, my son's waking up, I'm gonna have to go, but whether it's just like on the property or that building in particular, who knows? Speaking of creepy hospitals, though, if you've not seen the creepy hospital playlist that I did about my mom's 28 years working as a nurse, go watch that. I've also been talking about potentially interviewing some of her coworkers and getting some of their creepy hospital stories. So stay tuned for that. If you all have more creepy hospital stories you want to share, whatever, let me know.
Hey y'all, I'm back with another story time. Sorry for being MIA for 3 days, but I'm back and I'm better, okay? So we got a story time from one of my supporters. Her name is Sage, and she was 8 years old when this happened, so just keep that in mind. She said this was around the time where she started watching, like, Stranger Things. So she's in her room just chilling, watching TV, and that's when she notices the lights in her room start flickering. She start connecting the dots like, oh, this happens in Stranger Things. So she, like, gets scared. She ran into her parents' room, which is across from her room. And keep in mind, though, in order to get in the attic of the house, you have to be in her parents' room to get up there. So she goes in there. She sees that her parents aren't in there. She's looking up, she's like, okay, let me get back out of here. When she goes back out, she notices that the lights in her room are not flickering anymore. She's like, okay, cool. I'm going to just go back to watching TV. She goes back to watching TV. Now she's hearing footsteps. And she wasn't really specific if she was hearing the footsteps come from, like, the attic or if they was coming from the stairs going downstairs. She wasn't really specific, but she said that because she heard the footsteps, she ran downstairs to where her parents was. And, she wanted to go down there and get some comfort because she's 8 years old. That's pretty much it. I feel like that's probably just a coincidence, honestly. It probably has something to do with, like, the electricity, but it's a weird coincidence how you was watching Stranger Things and this happened. But if you guys want me to tell your story times, along with giving some of my story times and my mom's story times, definitely comment which down below, because I don't have a problem giving that to y'all.
He was an actor on Riverdale and Supernatural, and then he murdered his mom. Ryan Grantham was born and raised in Squamish, Canada, right outside of Vancouver and just north of Washington. He lived with his older sister Lisa and his mom Barbara, who he was very close with. Ryan's dad abandoned the family just shortly after Ryan was born. Ryan was severely bullied in school. He had a speech impediment. He was always much smaller than all the other kids. Even as an adult, he only ever reached about 5'2" in height. Sadly, even as a very young kid, Ryan really suffered with his mental health and he became extremely attached to his mother. When Ryan was still a very young kid, he became extremely interested in acting, and his mom, who wanted to support her struggling child, brought him to every single audition. And Ryan actually started booking roles by the time he was only 8 years old. Ryan was a pretty successful child actor because he was so small, he could play younger roles for much longer. He started out just booking like minor commercial roles, but then he booked his first ever movie role just 1 year into his career, and it was like this cute little Christmas movie. And after that, Ryan just started booking role after role. Like, he was really booked and busy. He booked the role of Todd, which was a lead role in an episode of Supernatural. Supernatural is a show that's been on my list of things to watch since high school, but I've actually never watched it. Ryan then booked a role in a movie that had like a bunch of A-list actors in it. This was a really big deal. He was going to be starring alongside Johnny Depp Heath Ledger, and Andrew Garfield. And through acting, Ryan became more confident than ever, and he was the happiest that he had ever been. And his mother, Barbara, was right by his side, supporting him and protecting him through all of it. At 11 years old, Ryan booked a role in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie. At 13 years old, he booked his first ever leading role in his own movie called Becoming Redwood.
Hi, I'm Ryan Grantham, and I'm playing the role of Redwood. Redwood is a 11-year-old boy, and he's determined, and he'll stop at almost nothing to get what he wants. If I could go back to the 70s, I think it'd be because of the fashion. Just because, look at these. How awesome are these pants? You will not find these today. We had to have these handmade. Come on. That's pretty awesome.
At this point, Ryan really seems like such a nice, happy kid. But as Ryan got older, he stopped booking as many roles, which is really common for child actors once they reach their teenage years and especially adulthood. This was extremely hard on Ryan, who didn't understand why he wasn't as successful as he was when he was a kid, and he became really depressed. By 2016, Ryan was 18 years old. He was a legal adult. He started college, but he was still taking himself to audition after audition, and all he was getting was rejection after rejection. But then Ryan booked a small role in the hit show Riverdale.
Fred Andrews. Well, wait, that's the man you killed. Tell me, I swear. Kill you!
Stop! He didn't do it. He didn't do anything wrong. He told the police he did it. To protect me, but it wasn't him. Okay? It was me. It was my fault. I took the car when I wasn't supposed to. I don't even have my license. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
And he thought that maybe his career was going to take off again, but it didn't. And Ryan just starts going down such a dark path. He's using substances, he's in and out of rehab a few times, he starts failing his college classes, and he just feels like an absolute failure. He's still living at home with his mom at this point, and she's really doing everything she can to support her kid that she knows is struggling. But Barbara was actually struggling a lot herself. She was juggling a lot at this point because it was actually around this time that Barbara was diagnosed with cancer. In 2019, Ryan is 21 years old, and he's in a really dark place, and he's having a lot of dark, violent thoughts and fantasies. He becomes obsessed with watching really dark, graphic, violent videos online of real murder, torture, and SA. Ryan became obsessed with weapons. He became obsessed with serial killers because he felt like he could relate to the serial killers because they were also weirdos. Ryan became obsessed with the 2019 Joker movie because he felt like he could relate to the Joker character in this movie. And spoiler alert for the ending of this movie, the Joker kills a lot of people, including his own mother, by the end of the film. It's around this time that Ryan is fantasizing about actually killing someone. And by the time the March 2020 lockdown started, those fantasies that Ryan was having became real plans to kill someone. Ryan wanted everyone to know his name. He wanted to be in the news, and he wanted to make the biggest impact as possible. So he actually began planning to assassinate the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is currently dating Katy Perry. Ryan plans the entire assassination, but then he starts to second guess himself because he feels bad because he doesn't want his mom to live with what he did. He doesn't want his mom to have to live with the fact that her child was a killer, that he was evil. So instead of just not killing someone, he decides that she needs to die first, and he begins planning to murder his mom so he could spare her from knowing that he was an evil killer. On March 31st, 2020, Barbara and Ryan were having a nice evening at home playing games, and then Ryan goes upstairs to his bedroom and he grabs a rifle. He brings it downstairs to kill his mom, but by the time he makes it to the steps, he hears his mom downstairs playing piano. Growing up, Barbara always used to play piano for Ryan. It was something that he really, really loved. It was a great memory growing up with his mom that he claimed to really love. So now, listening to his mom play the piano, Ryan starts to second guess if he wants to actually kill his mom. So he sits down on the steps, still holding the rifle, for over 15 minutes, trying to talk himself out of killing his mom. But ultimately, he decides to go through with it. Barbara is still playing piano, so her back is to Ryan. So thankfully, she never really knew what her son did to her. Walks up behind her, he points it at the back of her head, and then he pulls the trigger. 64-year-old Barbara White was a single mother of 2. She was a great mother who always put her kids first. She was their sole caregiver their entire lives, and she was even her own mother's caregiver. She was truly a great mother and a great person, and all she ever did her entire life was try to love and support her son. Ryan grabs a camera and he films himself right after he killed his mom. He tells the camera what he just did. He even films his mother's body. You can then hear him on the video going, "I just killed my mom. I just killed my mom. I shot the only person who loved me in the back of the head." But then Ryan watches some TV in the same room with his mother's body. He makes some homemade explosives. He takes a nap, and then he even eats, all with his mother's dead body in the same home, or even the same room. He then gets ready to drive to the Prime Minister's house to kill him. The Prime Minister actually lived on the complete other side of the country, so it would take him 50 hours if he drove just straight. So before he gets on his road trip, he makes himself a playlist. He gets in the car, he starts driving, but Ryan only makes it about 3 hours out of his 50-hour trip before he changes his mind for some reason and turns back around. But Ryan said that he didn't want his mom to die for nothing, so he drove to his college where he had a bunch of weapons and he planned a shooting, but thankfully he also changed his mind again. And instead, Ryan drove to the police station where he turned himself in. But sadly, not before his sister Lisa went to their mother's house, and she was tragically the person that found her mother's body. Ryan originally planned to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but he had multiple psyche evals where they all found him legally sane. So he pled guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 14 years. And if Ryan is granted parole at that time, he will be released in September of 2036 at the age of 37 years old. And if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Barbara White's story. She seemed like a truly amazing person, and she did not deserve what happened to her, and my heart truly goes out to anyone that knew and loved Barbara. Really interested to hear all your thoughts on this case. Have you ever heard of this case before? Let me know in the comments. But while you're there, please remember to always be respectful. You don't know who could be on the comments, who could have stumbled across this video. Someone that actually knew and loved Barbara in real life could be in the comments. So please always remember to be respectful. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we covered this case today. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
We don't talk nearly enough about how utterly terrifying it must have been to be on this bridge back on August 1st, 2007. It was a Wednesday during rush hour when the I-35 West Bridge sprawling over the Mississippi River began flooding with cars. Per usual, most of Minneapolis had just gotten off from their daily shift at work and were just trying to make it home, but sadly, that wouldn't be the case for everyone. Because at about 6:05 p.m., the 8-lane bridge collapsed under the weight of the slowed traffic. The bridge measured about 1,900 feet long, and in an instant, 456 feet of the bridge had dropped into the river, a 108-foot drop into the water or onto the riverbed. 111 vehicles in total had fallen off the bridge, and it all happened without warning, leaving no time for people to escape. In the blink of an eye, people that were just comfortably sitting in their vehicles on their daily drive home were now fighting their way out of rising waters, or were immediately crushed by falling sections of concrete. As the bridge had been undergoing resurfacing that day, the heavy machinery sitting along the roadway just added more pressure to the steel plates that would snap. Nearly 150 people were injured during the bridge collapse and 13 people died. Among the victims was this man, Peter Hausman, a 47-year-old computer security specialist. Peter had been on the phone with his wife when the bridge collapsed and the phone line went dead. Although he survived the initial fall, Peter went back into the water, attempting to reach a pregnant mother and her child who were trapped in a car. Unfortunately, he was unable to save them, and his body wouldn't be recovered until 9 days later. But Peter is still remembered as a hero.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Michael Packard might be the luckiest or unluckiest person alive. In 2001, when Michael was 38 years old, he was on a flight over Costa Rica when the small plane he was on crashed. The pilot, co-pilot, and a passenger were all killed on impact, but Michael and the 4 other passengers, they survived the crash, but they were all left badly injured and stranded in a very remote section of the jungle. The survivors attempted to use the downed plane's radio equipment to send out a distress signal to try to get someone to come out and help them, but they had no way of knowing if anybody was receiving their signal. And so all they could do was just send it out and then wait and hope somebody found them before they all died. And sure enough, 48 hours after crashing, rescuers were able to hack their way deep into the jungle where Michael and the other survivors were, and they were all saved. While Michael was recovering in the hospital, a doctor told him that based on his injuries, he would not have survived another night out in that jungle. The chances of even being in a plane crash are astronomically low. The odds are about 1 in 5 million, with some places giving odds as low as 1 in 20 million. To put that in perspective, Michael was far more likely to have been struck by lightning, which is about a 1 in 1 million chance, than he was to have been in that plane crash. But that plane crash would not be the last time that Michael defied the odds and did something totally unbelievable. Over the next couple of decades, Michael, who was a commercial diver by trade, would survive not 1, but 2 significant encounters with great white sharks off the coast of California. Some of Michael's friends would not be so lucky. Michael would get lost at sea, like really lost, like treading out in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight for hours lost. But miraculously, a boat would find him and save him again. And Michael would discover the body of a long-time missing person hidden underneath the water about 60 feet down off the coast of Massachusetts. But of all the improbable exploits of Michael's life, none is more unbelievable than what happened to him in 2021, which experts are saying he had about a 1 in 1 trillion chance of experiencing. On the morning of June 11th, 2021, Michael, who was 57 years old at the time, hopped in a boat with his longtime diving partner, Josiah. Once they were all situated and they had all their equipment inside of the boat, they took off and headed for the open waters right off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where they planned to do some lobster diving. A popular way to retrieve lobsters is to literally just dive down and by hand pick them up and bring them back to the surface. And so that day, that's what Michael and Josiah planned to do. Once they reached this spot right off the coast, Michael put on all of his scuba diving equipment and hopped in the water. Josiah did not put on any diving equipment because he was not going to be getting in the water for this dive. Instead, he would remain on the boat and help Michael get in and out of the water. He'd pull lobsters up onto the boat, and he was also there in case of an emergency, he could call for help. And so just after 6 a.m., once Michael was in the water and signaled he was good to go, he dove down below, and after a little while, he came back up, but with a relatively small haul of lobsters. And so the two men figured that, well, I guess today's just not a great day for catching lobsters. But regardless, for the next couple of hours, Michael continued to go down and catch as many lobsters as he possibly could. By 8 a.m., Michael had captured approximately 100 pounds of lobsters that were now in the boat. And so Michael and Josiah were actually starting to feel pretty good about this particular trip. And so Michael decided he would go back down one more time and try to get just a few more lobsters before they called it a day. And so Josiah remembers watching Michael, who was in the water, as he put his mouthpiece back in. He signaled up to Josiah that he was good to go, and Josiah watched as he disappeared below the surface. And the water was very calm, and Josiah is just kind of scanning out across the water, and then all of a sudden this eruption of white water came rushing up to the surface right where Michael had gone down below. And so right away, Josiah leaned out over the edge of the boat to see if he could look down and see his friend, but he didn't see Michael anywhere. Instead, he saw something massive moving around underneath them. After Michael had broken the surface on this final dive down to get more lobsters, his plan was to sink down to the bottom of the ocean at about 60 feet and then go hunting for lobsters. But when he had descended to about 45 feet, he felt something smash into him from behind that felt like a truck hitting him, and then everything around him went totally pitch black. The impact of whatever it was that hit him had caused his mouthpiece to get blown out of his mouth. So he doesn't have air, and he starts fumbling around to find his mouthpiece, but he can't find it. And as he's fumbling around, his hands are making contact with what feels like walls all around him. He was inside of an enclosed space. But when he had touched these walls, they were not normal walls. They were soft, but they were hard at the same time, and they seemed to be moving, like they were pulsating or quivering. The space he was in was fairly large, and it was not completely flooded with water. It was like Michael had slipped into this air pocket. But this air pocket was not stationary. It was moving, and pretty fast, because the water that was inside of it was violently sloshing all around. Michael could hear it slapping up against the walls. As Michael continued to panic and fumble around for his mouthpiece, he started to notice intense pressure on his legs, but he had no idea what was causing it, and because it's pitch black, he couldn't see what it was. Finally, Michael found the line that was connected to his mouthpiece. He jammed it in his mouth and he took a long inhale, and now that he could breathe again, he had this horrifying thought. Have I been swallowed by a shark? He instinctively began feeling around for the shark's teeth, but there were no teeth inside of this space. Instead, it was just these walls that continued to shift and move all around him, and that's when it dawned on him. He had been swallowed, but not by a shark. He had been swallowed by a whale. For nearly 45 seconds, Michael was trapped inside the closed mouth of a humpback whale. Despite their enormous size, they can be up to 60 feet long and weigh up to 70,000 pounds, they only eat small fish. So when this particular whale realized Michael was not a tiny fish, it began violently swinging its head side to side to try to dislodge Michael, and that caused that eruption of white water to go to the surface that Josiah saw. And after a few good shakes, Michael was spat out of this whale's mouth. Michael remembers suddenly being in the open water with enough light coming down that he could see around him. The water was very turbulent and churning, and he recalled as he made his way to the surface, looking straight down and seeing the tail fin of this enormous whale swimming away from him. Michael made his way to the surface and he flagged down Josiah, who boated over to him. He pulled him back into the boat, and Michael, who was totally traumatized by what happened, could only say to Josiah that he was inside of it and that it tried to eat him. After Josiah brought Michael back to shore and called the authorities, Michael was rushed to a hospital where he was evaluated, and unbelievably, he suffered really no injuries. He had some significant bruising to his legs where the whale had actually clamped down on him. That was the pressure he felt in his legs. The mouth of the whale was closing on his legs. But besides that, there really wasn't any other injuries. And so later that day, he was discharged. It's believed the whale was a juvenile that had been seen in the area that was about 30 to 35 feet long, and that had just accidentally scooped Michael up. The whale was certainly not trying to hurt Michael. Whales, especially humpback whales, are not in the business of hurting people. But in this exchange with Michael, Michael could have very easily died. He could have drowned or suffocated inside the mouth of this whale, or he could have just died from blunt force trauma. But luckily he didn't. Despite how terrifying this incident sounds, Michael was incredibly casual in all of his interviews about this. He just kind of acted like, yeah, these things kind of happen, whales come out of nowhere, they just scoop you up, it happens. And he would tell the incredulous reporters who just could not believe this guy was real that as soon as he was better, he was getting back in the water and going lobster diving.
I can't imagine being in a situation where your best option is to eat another human being. It was May 1933 and Joseph Stalin had power over the Soviet Union. And he wanted to create this crazy social experiment. He basically decided to take people that he classed as undesirable, some of them criminals, but a lot of them just did nothing wrong. They just happened to be really poor. He put them in these so-called labor camps. Now his two main goals were firstly to just get rid of these people basically. They didn't fit with his idea of the perfect Soviet Union. And secondly, he kind of just wanted to see what happened. He was like, will they create their own self-sustaining communities? He was like, I want to see if they can manage to survive and build something out of nothing. It was about to become one of the darkest chapters of Soviet history. So he banished these people to a remote island in the Siberian River called Nazino Island. The island was absolutely tiny, and you can imagine how rammed it was when they suddenly dumped 6,000 people there. It was shoulder to shoulder, and what made it so much worse was the fact that they had no shelter and no food. There was actually really no way for these people to survive, and things very quickly escalated into horror. After the first night, nearly 300 people were dead. There was nowhere to sleep and take shelter, like I said, so nowhere to shelter from the harsh conditions. These people just perished. And of course there was no medical care. I mean, there was not even any food, so these people very quickly got very ill. And they're hungry, they're unwell, they got very desperate. So authorities went over there. I mean, they definitely could have just rescued people and stopped this whole thing. But actually what they did made this whole thing a lot worse. They gave out rations, but this was even more cruel because this wasn't actually something that they could eat. This was flour. Bear in mind, these people have no cooking utensils, no ingredients, just raw flour. What the hell are they supposed to do with that? Some people tried mixing the flour with river water and got very sick from that, and some died. And some just tried eating it dry and it made them choke. And people were still desperate for just anything that they could get their hands on. So when they were going to give out these rations at the distribution stations, people were charging them. People were desperate to get their hands on them. These desperate, hungry people would charge the stations, and the guards would just shoot at them. Everybody was starving to death, and the survivors were left with basically no choice but to eat the people that were dying around them. They would find corpses on the floor and have to feast off them. One survivor recalled how he had to eat other humans' livers and hearts. Now, it was actually pure evil because these guards were just watching all of this unfold. They definitely could have stopped it, but they decided not to. In fact, when they would see people trying to flee the island on rafts, they would shoot them dead. Within weeks, the situation got so bad, and these guards were kind of fearing the retribution, that they just had to step in. By the time this sick experiment was over, over just 2,000 people remained, riddled with diseases and traumatized, but they were alive. And this Cannibal Island horror actually was totally hidden from the public. Nobody found out until about the 1980s/90s. The entire event was classed as a state secret, and survivors were obviously too scared to speak out about what they saw. Local people now do visit the island to lay flowers and pay tribute to the victims who lost their lives there.
These look like two sweet, innocent grandmamas, correct? Incorrect. They're actually both psychopathic murderers. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Melvin Griesbauer. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't have a ton of background information on the victim in this case, but he lived on this large farm property in Novinger, Missouri. Melvin Griesbauer was born on August 15th, 1962. He was a Navy vet and an Army reservist, and Melvin had served in Iraq. At some point, I'm not 100% sure when, but he would marry this woman here, Elaine K. Young. She would go by Kay. She had children from a previous marriage, but her and Melvin did not have kids. She was also a grandmother. March 23rd, 2006, sometime after 1:30 in the morning, Kay will call 911 to report that her husband has died in an apparent suicide. When police arrive on scene, they find Kay Young, and she's also in the company of another woman they would later find out is named Catherine Mock, a friend of hers. Melvin is found just outside of the barn. He is lying on his back, and he has a bullet wound through his cheek. They find .30 ammunition about 10 feet away from his body. The gun was found in a position right next to his body, but he was dressed for working on the farm. And he had on a very thick pair of work gloves. They wanted to test something out. They took his fingers and they tried to put it through the trigger point of the gun. It wouldn't fit because of the gloves. And the casing being more than 10 feet away from the gun also told them that something isn't right here. If he had done this himself, the casing should have been near his body and in a different location. The coroner would soon determine that this was not a suicide. Melvin Griesbauer was murdered. Somebody shot him. And if it wasn't Melvin, there were only two other people on the farm property that night. Melvin's wife, Kay, and Kay's friend, Catherine Mock. Both grandmas. Kay Young had been married multiple times. The time this case occurred, she owned her own dog breeding business, and I believe the business was on the farm property, which was her family's farm. Catherine Mock was also a dog groomer. She was from Cassville, Missouri, and she was just there visiting Kay. But she too was married. She was married to a truck driver. His name was Butch Mock. So Kay tells police that Melvin came home sometime a little after midnight. He had worked at a local meat packing plant. And then she went to bed, and her friend Catherine was already in bed. And then she is awoken by the sound of a gunshot. She then wakes up Catherine because she's scared to go see what that was all about. And then they find Melvin. They both talked to police separately. Their stories were damn near identical, like word for word. It was very clearly a rehearsed story. And police searched the property, including the home itself. They find a ski mask, they find gloves, they find insurance policies that would be payable to Kay in the event of Melvin's death. They found records in the home that Kay was actually struggling badly financially. She was on the verge of losing the family's farm property, which had been in their family for generations. And Kay was also on the verge of losing her dog breeding business. Well, guess how much money she would get if Melvin died? Over $1 million. They bring Kay in for questioning, and she tells them now a different story. She didn't have to wake Catherine up that night. She said when she heard the shot, Catherine was sitting in the bathtub crying. She looked guilty of something. Well, now they're thinking, oh, Catherine killed him. To make matters even worse for Catherine, Catherine's own son would go to police and tell them that Catherine had approached him, asking if he knew where to find a hitman. Not for her, but for Kay. Okay, so Catherine didn't shoot him. Kay did. Catherine's covering for her. Did they hire a hitman? Well, they found no proof of that. They did discover that Kay Young was on dating apps while she was still married to Melvin, while he was still alive. she was essentially cheating on him. To further complicate matters, the ski mask they found in the home had DNA on it. That DNA belonged to Catherine. And then they look up the purchase of that ski mask. Catherine had purchased it at a Walmart just the day before. Now they have no idea who pulled the trigger. And then another kicker to this story. Catherine is married to a man named Butch. Well, Butch was, before all this happened, he was having suspicions that his wife, Kathy, was trying to have him killed. On one occasion, she bought him a supposedly new motorcycle, but it had been sabotaged, and he almost died using it. And when Melvin was found murdered, and Catherine is now in the middle of all of it, he was like, okay, she was trying to kill me. Why? For money. So Kay and Kathy, or Catherine, they are both arrested. They uncover more information, conversations Kay was having with these stranger men on these dating apps saying that she wished her husband was dead. So what they believe is that Kay befriended Catherine, saw something in her that she would be able to help her in this plan. And then Catherine's son, another one of her sons who was in jail, urged his mother to tell the truth. Catherine says she was terrified of Kay, that Kay needed Catherine almost as a fall person. And if Catherine or Kathy tried to say anything, Kay would kill her too. But Kathy still went along with the plan and assisted her. But she did tell police that Kay was the one to physically pull the trigger and kill Melvin. Not to mention they had evidence that Kathy was trying to find ways to kill her husband, Butch. He may have been a pawn in the whole scheme, but she was still Cuckoo Cuckoo, who was hell-bent on killing someone. Both women were arrested and charged with the murder of Melvin Griesbauer, and both women were found guilty of the murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Kay never saw a single dime of the $1.2 million. She still ended up losing the farm, she still ended up losing her business, and she lost her freedom. And so I would like to think that Melvin, in the end, got his own revenge.
Scary things found in photos. She said she was taking photos of the mirror to list it for sale, but when she did, she noticed something sinister. When I saw this photograph, I thought it was a little girl-like figure at the front, until I saw a head poking out the doorway. She claims that she didn't see this head in person, and it only appeared on the photo. A nurse who was working a night shift was doing some paperwork inside of a treatment room. She claims that she was the only person inside of that room, but she did get a sense as if someone else was there. She said she felt like she was being watched, something which happened quite often, so she pulled out her phone and began taking several photographs around the room. When she looked back at the photos, she noticed something was looking right back at her. In fact, it was something kind of transparent, kind of looks like a little girl. They had their photo taken on the beach at Blackpool, but later they realised that they were joined by somebody else. The person who took the photo claimed there was only 3 people there that day, himself taking the photo and the other 2 that were in the photo. So what on earth is that between their legs? Ghost? Prank? Either way, terrifying.